The Gabgu blood and the Creed. Two names that have been forever intertwined in an epic rivalry. A rivalry born on the streets of Gab, fueled by generations of conflict and bloodshed. In this essay we delve deep into the history of these two groups, exploring the roots of their animosity, and the key events that have shaped their relationship. From the earliest skirmishes to the more recent standoffs, we'll uncover the stories that have defined this enduring conflict. We'll examine the impact this rivalry has had on Gabby and its people, and we'll look at the current state of affairs, asking the question, is a lasting peace possible, or is this a feud destined to continue? Join me as we attempt to unravel the complex tapestry of loyalty, betrayal, and violence that has come to define the Gabgu blood and the Creed. To understand the Gabgu blood, one must first understand the environment that birthed them. Gabg is a city of contrasts, where towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over crumbling tenements. It's a place where the wealthy and the impoverished live side by side, yet worlds apart. The city's history is rich and complex, filled with stories of triumph and struggle, of unity and division. Gabga, a city steeped in history and cultural diversity, has always been marked by stark economic disparities. The affluent areas boast opulent homes, manicured lawns, and a sense of security, while just a few blocks away the scene changes dramatically. Here, in the less fortunate neighborhoods, the streets are lined with dilapidated buildings, and the air is thick with a sense of neglect and abandonment. The blood emerged from the ashes of this inequality, finding unity and purpose amidst the poverty and neglect of South Gabgu. In these neighborhoods, opportunities were scarce and the future seemed uncertain. Yet it was here that a group of young men found a sense of belonging and identity. They were bound together by their shared experiences and their desire to rise above their circumstances. In the 1970s, South Gabgu was a place forgotten. The city had turned its back on these neighborhoods, leaving them to fend for themselves. The infrastructure was crumbling, and the streets were plagued by crime and violence. For the youth growing up in South Gabg, the future seemed bleak, and hope was a rare commodity. Crumbling infrastructure, limited opportunities, and rampant crime painted a bleak picture for the youth growing up there. The schools were underfunded, and jobs were hard to come by. Many young people felt trapped, with few options for a better life. It was in this environment of despair and frustration that the seeds of the Gabgu blood were sown. It was in this crucible of hardship that the Gabgu blood took form. The young men who would become its members were driven by a desire to protect themselves and their community. They sought to create a sense of order and justice in a world that seemed chaotic and unjust. They were not just a gang, they were a brotherhood, united by their shared struggles and their determination to survive. Initially, they were a loose collective of young men seeking refuge and strength in numbers. They found solace in each other's company, and began to form a bond that went beyond mere friendship. They shared their hopes and dreams, their fears and frustrations, and in doing so, they created a sense of family. This bond gave them the strength to face the challenges of their environment and to stand up against the forces that sought to keep them down. They sought to create their own sense of community, their own code of justice in a world that had seemingly turned its back on them. They organized community events, helped each other out in times of need, and stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. They became a force to be reckoned with, not just because of their strength in numbers, but because of their unwavering commitment to each other and to their community. With time, their bond solidified, and what started as a brotherhood for survival evolved into something more potent, more organized, more dangerous. They developed a code of conduct, a set of rules that governed their actions and their interactions with the outside world. They became more strategic in their operations, more disciplined in their approach, and as they grew in strength and numbers, they also grew in influence, becoming a powerful force in the streets of South Gabgu. Just as the blood found their footing in South Gabg across town, a different group was taking shape. The Creed, unlike the blood, did not emerge from deprivation. Their origins were rooted in the affluent neighborhoods of North Gabg, a world of privilege and opportunity. But even within this world of affluence, a desire for belonging, for identity, for purpose simmered beneath the surface. The Creed provided an outlet for this yearning, attracting the sons and daughters of Gabg's elite. They were drawn to the allure of rebellion, the thrill of operating outside the established order. Their early activities were marked by acts of vandalism, petty theft, and open defiance of authority. However, as their confidence grew, so did their ambition. They sought to carve their own legacy in the annals of Gabgu, and in doing so, they set themselves on a collision course with the already established power of the Blood. Section 4, Clash of Titans, the rivalry ignites. The rivalry between the Gabgu Blood and the Creed did not ignite overnight. It was a complex and multifaceted conflict that had been brewing for years, simmering just beneath the surface of everyday life in the city. The roots of this animosity can be traced back to the early days of Gabgu's urban development, where the seeds of discord were sown in the fertile ground of economic disparity and social upheaval. It was a slow burn, fueled by territorial disputes, economic competition, and a fundamental clash of ideologies. The Blood, a group that emerged from the working-class neighborhoods, felt a deep connection to the streets they called home. They saw themselves as the true guardians of Gabgu, the ones who had built the city from the ground up with their sweat and toil. On the other hand, the Creed represented a new wave of urban settlers, often seen as outsiders who were trying to impose their own vision of progress and modernity on a city that had its own unique identity. The Blood, born from the streets, saw the Creed as entitled interlopers, attempting to claim a piece of a world they had never truly known. This perception was not entirely unfounded, as many members of the Creed came from more affluent backgrounds and had the resources to influence the city's development in ways that often marginalized the existing communities. The Blood viewed these changes as a direct threat to their way of life, a force that sought to erase their history and culture in the name of progress. The Creed, in turn, viewed the Blood as archaic and brutish, clinging to the fringes of a city that was rapidly evolving. To them, the Blood represented an obstacle to the future they envisioned for Gabgu, a future characterized by economic growth, technological advancement, and a cosmopolitan lifestyle. The Creed believed that their approach was the only way forward, and they were determined to reshape the city according to their ideals, even if it meant displacing the long-standing communities that had been there for generations. This simmering tension finally boiled over in the summer of 1982. The city was already a powder keg, with minor skirmishes and confrontations becoming increasingly common. The hot summer days only added to the volatility as tempers flared and patience wore thin. It was during this time that a seemingly insignificant incident, a minor altercation between a member of the Blood and a member of the Creed, served as the spark that ignited the flames of conflict. What began as a minor altercation between members of the two groups quickly escalated into a full-blown riot that engulfed the streets of Gabgu. The initial clash drew in more members from both sides, and before long the situation spiraled out of control. The streets became a battleground, with makeshift barricades, flying debris, and the sounds of chaos filling the air. The authorities were caught off guard, unable to contain the violence that spread like wildfire through the city. The Gabgu riot, as it came to be known, lasted 3 days, and left an indelible scar on the city. For 72 hours, Gabgu was a war zone, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The aftermath was a scene of devastation, burned-out buildings, looted stores, and a community left in shock and mourning. The riot not only caused physical destruction, but also deepened the emotional and psychological wounds that had been festering for years. Homes were burned, businesses were looted, and lives were lost on both sides. The human cost of the conflict was staggering, with families torn apart and entire neighborhoods left in ruins. The emergency services worked tirelessly to restore order and provide aid, but the damage had already been done. The Gabgu riot was a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the destructive power of unresolved tensions. This event marked a turning point in the relationship between the Blood and the Creed, transforming their rivalry into open warfare. The lines had been drawn, and there was no turning back. The Gabgu riot was not just a moment of violence, it was a catalyst that forever changed the dynamics of the city. The conflict between the Blood and the Creed would continue to shape the future of Gabgu, leaving a legacy of division and strife that would be felt for generations to come. Section 5. Defining Moments, the Battle for Gabgu. The Gabgu riot was just the beginning. It marked the start of a prolonged period of unrest and violence that would come to define the city for decades. The streets of Gabgu, once bustling with everyday life, were transformed into battlegrounds. The initial riot was a spontaneous eruption of anger and frustration, but it quickly spiraled into something much more sinister and organized. In the years that followed, the Blood and the Creed clashed repeatedly, each encounter pushing the boundaries of violence and brutality. These weren't just random acts of violence, they were calculated moves in a deadly game of chess. Each side sought to outmaneuver the other, using the city streets as their chessboard and the lives of its residents as pawns. One such defining moment was the battle for the docks in 1987. The docks were more than just a strategic location. They were the lifeblood of Gabgu's underground economy. Whoever controlled the docks controlled the flow of illegal goods into the city, and with it, a significant source of power and revenue. Control of the docks, with its lucrative smuggling routes, was essential for both groups. The Blood and the Creed both understood that dominance over this area would give them a significant advantage. The battle that ensued was not just a fight for territory, but a fight for economic supremacy. The ensuing conflict was a brutal display of force, lasting for weeks and leaving countless dead or wounded. The docks, once a bustling hub of activity, were left in ruins. The scars of this battle were not just physical, they left a lasting impact on the psyche of the city and its inhabitants. Another pivotal moment was the assassination of Big Tony Rossi, a high-ranking Creed leader in 1992. Rossi was not just a leader, he was a symbol of the Creed's power and influence. His assassination was a bold statement, a declaration of war that reverberated through the ranks of both gangs. While the Blood never officially claimed responsibility, the killing sent shockwaves through Gabg. It was a clear message that no one was untouchable, that the rules of engagement had changed. The assassination marked a turning point in the conflict, escalating the violence to new and unprecedented levels. It signified a willingness to cross lines that had previously been respected, even in the midst of their bloody feud. The assassination of Rossi was not just an act of violence, it was a strategic move designed to destabilize the Creed and assert the Blood's dominance. It was a move that would have far-reaching consequences for both gangs and the city of Gabgu. These events, and countless others like them, cemented the rivalry between the Blood and the Creed, shaping the landscape of fear and violence that permeated Gabg. The city became a symbol of the destructive power of gang warfare, a place where the lines between right and wrong, good and evil, were blurred beyond recognition. The battle for Gabgu was not just a series of violent encounters, it was a struggle for the soul of the city itself.